So how do we actually use these arrays? Well, the good thing is it's not that hard actually. What we really need to know is how do we create them in our programs and how do we manipulate them? How do we add data? How do we remove data and whatnot? What do we do if we know some of the values in the beginning? What do we do if we don't know any of the values? All that kind of information. It's not too bad though. So let's start off with how to create them, how to define an array. Well, the good thing is that it's very similar to defining a regular variable. So if I had a regular variable, let's say called num, I might say var num. And that's it. But if I want to create an array of nums, such as on the left-hand side of the screen here, I would do something like var nums, give it a name, and it follows the same naming conventions as other variables. The only difference is now I just say equals opening and closing square brackets. Nothing inside. By putting this assignment statement with the opening and closing square brackets, that tells the compiler that we are creating an array, which means it's going to set up the space that's needed and everything like that, and we're going to be good to go. So that's how we define an array. Now at this point there is nothing in it. It is completely empty. So if we try to display a value of the nums array, so if I try to do something like console.log bracket nums square bracket 0, which would be the first element of the nums array, what that's actually going to display on the screen is undefined. Undefined is JavaScript's way of saying nothing. It doesn't exist. It's never been defined in any way, shape, or form. So that's actually the value that will be displayed on the screen, which isn't very useful to us. So we got to make sure that we give it some values. Well, we can do that in a number of ways, and it really depends on what our knowledge level is first. If I know what the numbers are, let's say I know that the numbers are 9, -3, 6, 5, 2, and 12, I can actually specify that when I first create the actual array. So I could, instead of just saying var nums equals opening and closing square brackets, I could actually specify the values. I could say 9, -3, 6, 5, 2, and 12. That would specify the array and put all the values in there. What we would say is it initializes the values. But what if I don't actually know the values right at the very beginning? What if I know them, I get them from the user or something like that? We can specify them in another way. So let's go back to the starting method, which is the opening and closing square brackets. If I want to specify an individual index of the array to a certain value, I could say nums square bracket, specify which index I want to assign. In this case, let's assign index 0 equal to, oops, it's not text, equal to 9. Now I still got to be careful, because if I do a console.log of nums bracket 0, this will actually give me my 9, and I'll see a 9 on the screen. However, if I put a 1, that value has not yet been set up. So again, I'll get that undefined value, which is not very useful for us. So we as programmers have to be knowledgeable about what's going on and how many elements are actually in our array. Let's just get rid of that chunk there. So that will assign a specific index or a specific element at an index in the array to the value 9. Now, what if we want to just keep continually adding to the end? So let's say I wanted to add another value over here. Let's say 7, which should now be index 6, which means now there is 7 elements in the array. What I would do is I would need to know where the end of that array is. Well, I could track that with a variable and keep counting every time I add a new element to the array. But luckily, JavaScript and most programming languages actually have built-in properties to handle this, to access the number of elements in an array. And it's very simple to do. So if I want to know how many elements are in the array, all I have to do is say the name of the array dot length. Now let's think about this for a second. If I just do, let's say, console.log nums.length, lowercase l, just like that, the value you're going to see on the screen at this point is going to be the value 1. It's not going to be the value 0. 0 represents the last index value of the array, but I want to know how many elements there are. So nums.length is going to tell me how many elements are in the array. And at this point, it's only one element, which has a value of 9. Now I can use this little mechanism to determine, well, where the end of the array is. And by knowing where the end of the array is, I can now insert a new value at that point. So I could say nums at nums.length is equal to, let's say, 7, adding that new value in there. So that says, all right, let's read this and focus our way out. Just like Bedmus, we're going to do brackets first. Nums.length. Well, currently that nums.length is going to give us the value 1 because there is one element. So it's going to say, so if we take this and we substitute the value 1 in there, it's saying nums at index 1 assign it the value 7, which means over here it's going to come up in here and assign it right there. So that -3 would not be there, a 7 would be there instead. So that's one strategy for storing a value at the end of the array. The next strategy is a simple command that JavaScript is actually built in. Nums.push. And then we just put in whatever value we want. Let's say 6. So after this line of code, assuming the other lines above it actually functioned and worked and everything like that, that would say find the end of the array. It essentially does this exact line with a different value in that place. But it says find the end of the array and put the value 6 in that location. So in this case, at this point, there would be 2 elements of the array, which means nums.length would give us 2. So nums at 2, which is this place right here, insert the value 6. So then after this line of code is done, we would then have 3 elements of our array. 9, 7, and then 6. So now we know how to define our arrays. We know how to give them starting values. We know how to calculate the length. We know what happens if we try to exceed, if we try to go outside of that. And we also know how to insert a new element to the end of the array. So in the between as well as at the end. What if we want to remove an element, a specific element, not one from the end or one from the beginning, but just an element in general? Well, there is a command built in to do that as well. So let's say let's get rid of all this, because all we have at this point is just 9, 7, and 6. Let's say I want to get rid of element 9, which would then put value 9, which would then put 7 at index 0 and 6 at index 1, essentially shifting everything over to the left. Well, there's a command that we can do that called splice. So I could say nums.splice. I need to say, hey, which index do I want to get rid of? So if I want to get rid of index 0, I would specify that index 0. Splice is a special command. You can actually get rid of more than one element. So the next parameter that we have to specify is how many elements we want to get rid of. Well, I only want to get rid of 1 at this point. So what that'll do is it'll say start at index 0 and erase 1 element. So it would go over here and it would essentially get rid of that. And that would mean when this line of code is done, we would have 2 elements in there, 7 and 6 at index 0 and index 1. So let's just do a quick little tag of what we have over here. So after this line, we would just have the 9 in there. And then after this line, we would have 9 and 7. And then after this line, we would have 9, 7, and 6. And then after this line, the 9 is gone, and everything has been shifted to the left. The same thing would happen if I spliced in the middle of the array as well. It would just shift everything over to the left one, essentially removing and overwriting that old data. So that's everything there is to know about arrays.